Greetings, folks, and welcome to episode 2 of Mark Anthony K Talks With. Now, as you remember, I started this little segment about a month ago, and I did it with the vinyl spinner, Dylan. The episode went over really well, which I was really happy with, and I figured that even if it didn't go good, which I knew it was gonna go pretty good because he's a pretty popular character on the internet. I figured that I was gonna continue with this because I had such a great time talking with Dylan. I could only imagine how it was gonna be speaking with some of these other people that I had in mind to talk about. And again, the whole purpose of this segment is to kind of right a wrong that I think is happening in the internet world or in the YouTube world, and that is there are certain people I think on the YouTube platform that are just not being, viewed the way they should be. In the sense that Dylan, for example, 5 years on YouTube, never once had an interview on another channel with anybody. Unbelievable. And today is another character that I've rarely seen on other people's channel. According to him, he was maybe on one Man Cave of Doom episode once a long time ago, and that's Mr. Scott Waters. Now, Scott's been around for a long time. In fact, he's probably one of the first people, in fact, that I think I saw when I started getting into the whole YouTube thing. And his channel has been something that I've been subscribed to for a long time and watch religiously every time he puts up something new. It helps that he does a lot of stuff around the music that I truly love, which is metal and hard rock music, which is a breath of fresh air, in my opinion, considering how many channels there are now talking about jazz and all kinds of other stuff like that. Yes, I know jazz is a great audiophile sort of music, but metal is really the music that got me into playing guitar and got me into music in general, whether it's production or whatever. So it's always going to be number one in my heart, and anybody who talks about it or shows rare records that are in the metal genre, they're going to be high on my list of channels to view on a weekly basis, and Scott Waters is one of those people. So without any more further ado, I will quit my yapping and let's go over to my nice segment that I did with Scott today. There is going to be a little dropout at one part because I don't know what the heck happened, but in the middle of our recording, everything just kind of froze for a second, but then we continued from where we pretty much left off. So when you see a little jump, that's what it was. So like I said, without any further ado, let's go to my interview with Scott Waters. We talk about a lot of things, actually. Record collecting, what got him into record collecting, what was his first thing that he got into as far as YouTube. We talk about his job that he has, his daytime job, which is based all around music as well. I'll just shut up. Let him talk, and you'll enjoy it. Trust me, it was a really good sit down. So here we go, Mr. Scott Waters. Greetings, folks. Mark Anthony K here, and I'm back for another Mark Speaks With segment. So today I'm very honored to have on my channel today a longtime member of the YouTube community and a longtime vinyl collector and somebody who I've been watching for a very, very, very long time. I think one of the very first channels I discovered when I started YouTube was Mr. Scott Waters. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I was talking to Scott offline a minute ago, talking about how I thought it's a bit of a crime that people like Scott and even the person I spoke with before, Dylan, the vinyl spinner, have rarely been asked to do something like this in an interview segment. So I think it's a complete crime, and we're going to change that today by having Scott on here and talk to him about lots of things vinyl related and music related in general. So I'm sure Scott will be ready to give us the fascinating answers that we're looking forward to. So first question is, you are one of the longest running YouTubers, certainly part of what people consider the old guard, I guess, with Lazarus and Vance, Zep Pearl and those guys.
Yep.
What made you start, and what was one of the first channels you ever discovered?
I started, gosh, it's been at least 10 years ago now, and it was a bunch of different channels, but Lazarus was one of them, and Greeno was another one. And then Dadgummit, I'm going to forget his actual channel name. Think what's the another guy who's better? He's not around anymore, but he was doing he and Greeno were doing stuff together all the time.
Mm.
I can't remember his name. It'll come to me later on when we're not talking about this anymore. And anyhow, yeah, I was just on YouTube goofing around, and I kept watching these guys showing off. Hey, I got this new record and that new record and this new record, and I'm like, that's fun because I enjoy showing people my collection and and talking about music. So I was like, I'm gonna start doing that myself, and that's pretty much what it was.
Hmm.
And I was also playing in a band at the time too, so it was a good way to connect with people that way as well. So
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I do my own kind of musical stuff too. I think I sent you some of my records, the Project
oh yeah,
Gemini stuff.
I
And
have actually have them sitting right there. I was just listening to them the other day.
oh, great. I'm glad that you enjoy them because I mean, it's one of those. This is another great example of why these kind of connections are so fantastic. Because when I sent Scott my records, I had noticed all of a sudden a big spike in my subscribers went up, and then all of a sudden I had some orders come up because of Scott, showing my albums and talking about them on his channel. So again, thank you, Scott, for doing that.
Absolutely, I am a big fan of prog rock, which is pretty much what I consider Project Gemini. So
Yeah. Great, thank you. Speaking of vinyl, I can see behind you, not only do you have vinyl, but you have CDs and you have other sort of medium as well in the music sort of world there. How many albums do you roughly have in CDs in your collection?
oh wow,
You can ballpark it.
it's got to be at least 10,000 of each. And I'm guessing there. I just have no clue. I mean, I just got rid of like 800 CDs. I just had to make some room, and it didn't even like make a dent. So, but yeah, I mean,
Now,
I've been collecting for decades. So
yeah,
yeah, CDs,
so
vinyls. I do cassettes and some 8 tracks too, but mostly CDs and vinyl.
yeah. So would you say that since you just said earlier that you're in a band, right? What's
Correct.
what's the name of the band that you're in or that you're still in maybe now?
No, I'm not in any band at the moment, but I played for Ultimatum. I sang for
Uh,
Ultimatum for 20 years, and then I
Oh,
sang for the Resurrected Vengeance Rising for 2 years. We were under the name Once Dead.
cool. Very cool. So I'm guessing that were some of these CDs exchanges between bands, or were they like from record people, or how did you get all these crazy amount of CDs?
Well, it's that's part of it. When we would go out and do shows all the time. We were constantly, traveling all over the country playing shows, and we'd meet other bands, play shows with other bands, and I always buy stuff from those tables. But the big jump in my collection was as I don't know, back in 1999 I started getting into the internet, and it was kind of new back then. And by the year 2000, like January 2000, I created my own little No Life Till Metal.com website, which was just my CD collection. So it'll be a picture of the CD, the cover, and the songs. And I'd write up a little, maybe a review or just a few words about it, or I can't believe I found this amazing CD.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. And for whatever reason, that site took off. I was on free servers, and I kept getting kicked off free servers for too much bandwidth use. So I finally had to pay. I finally had to pay for a server, and that site did really. It's still up actually. NoLifeToMetal.com. I don't update it anymore, but it's still there, and I can still pay to keep it there. But I mean, it probably has at least 5,000-6,000 reviews on it. And after a
Wow.
while, people just started sending me stuff. I don't see this on your website. Here's this CD. I don't see that on your website. Here's this CD. And some of the
Very
stuff was
cool.
just like stuff I don't like. Like, like I
Yeah.
like this band called Guardian, and I really liked their first 3 albums. But after that, they put out some stuff that was just outside of my musical range.
Hmm.
And people were like, "You don't have that album," and I had like 6 copies. So I finally just put it on there just so I wouldn't get any more copies in the mail.
Great. Well, I mean, you can't complain about that. Getting music like that, it must be fantastic to get, all these different albums and stuff that you don't have in your collection. So that brings me to my next question to you. Within this vast collection of yours, do you still have a grail or an album that you're still searching for?
Yeah, there's quite a few that I'm still looking for. Back in 1990, so I've been collecting since I was a kid, literally, like in grade school back in the 70s. I started collecting vinyl, and then when got into CDs. And then in 1990 I got involved with we'll just call it I guess got religious, let's call it that.
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
call it my super Christian days, when I thought I had to get rid of all my music, and I allowed the church to convince me to get rid of all that music. So I sold my whole collection and used the money for a down deposit for our first house, and
Okay.
been buying it back ever since 1990. So there's several things from that collection that I've never been able to get back,
Mm.
and I probably never will. Most of them are a lot of them are like bootlegs and stuff like that, but a lot of it also was to like local bands that I grew up with. That I just there was a small label in New Jersey where I was growing up, and they put out an album called Trenton City Murders, and then they put out another album by a band called Heathen's Rage. I managed to find the Heathen's Rage, but I've still have yet to find the Trenton City Murders album. So that's
Cool.
one of many.
Well, you never know. Doing these kind of things, maybe somebody who's watching might have a copy or might know where to get a copy, and you never know. Maybe get in contact with you about it. You know.
Yeah.
Um, so one band that I know that you're very into is Aerosmith. I see a lot of Aerosmith stuff on your channel. Uh, do you have anything in that collection that you're still looking for as well?
I,
There you go.
I just have to pull this one out. Yeah, Aerosmith. I've been a nutcase of an Aerosmith fan since I was in grade school. I bought Toys in the Attic as a new release. What was that, 75? I was literally in grade school, and all my friends were into the Jackson 5, and I can't remember all the Sean Cassidy was really big back then with all the grade school kids, and I was listening to Aerosmith, Kiss, and Ted Nugent. So I actually used to get into fights with kids over Aerosmith's better than the Jackson 5. No way, the Jackson 5 rule. Jackson 5 sucks. I don't think they suck these days, but when I was a kid, I was into that kind of stuff. And but I'm always looking for Aerosmith bootlegs, and there is very little from Aerosmith that I don't have. Mostly it's 7-inch singles. There's several Japanese and Mexico singles that I'm still looking for. But yeah, my Aerosmith collection is pretty large.
So you're speaking about 7-inch singles and vinyl, obviously. So obviously you collect a lot of stuff, not just US or Canadian. You collect globally Aerosmith stuff. Is there a country that you find more difficult than others to find Aerosmith stuff?
Yeah, the Spain and Mexico copies are really tough to find. I'm always looking for them, but they just don't pop up very often. When you do, they're a little bit out of my budget. So
Mm.
there's two Mexico singles right now on eBay that I'm watching, but both of them are at $200 a piece, and
Yeah.
I just can't do $200 for a 7-inch single.
Yeah, exactly. So I asked you earlier to pull out a couple of records that that I think, well, that you feel are important to you. You want to show us a couple and maybe talk to us about why you find
Sure.
them important?
I think all the ones I pulled kind of have an emotional connection. I mean,
Okay.
there's albums that, like the Aerosmith record I pulled, Rocks. That's just an album that it's one of my all-time favorite albums. It's one that I play all the time, and I can share stories about that too. But this one here, it's way outside the hard rock, heavy metal spectrum of things that I usually show. But this is actually an album out of my dad's collection. My dad passed away, so I just kind of cherish this album as you
Yeah.
know, and it's just one of the few things. My dad was always into classical music, and I was always into hard rock and metal, and he always called it noise, and he hated my music. But there was a few things where we crossed over, and the Dave Clark Five just happened to be one of those bands. So to this day, I still love the Dave Clark Five, even though it's a bit outside the normal for me. And I also cherish this because I've never seen this cover again.
Yeah.
This usually the cover looks. I grabbed it because usually the cover looks like that.
Oh, nice.
And, it's got all the guys in the ties, and this was the copy he bought as a new release. So,
Oh, great.
and yeah, I mean it's old school rock and roll. It's got a lot of hits on it. I'm sure everybody's heard bits and pieces and Glad All Over.
Yeah.
Feeling glad
And
all over.
and they also and there's also, of course, a Kiss connection with Any Way You Want It that
Yep,
Kiss covered, right?
absolutely. And Glad All Over was recorded by several different bands too. TT Quick comes to mind. Their stuff has been covered by a lot of different bands. They had a lot of hits.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Dave Clark Five, and then let's see, I pulled one of my other favorite artists, Ted Nugent, who I've met 3 times, but this was actually the first time I got to meet him in person, where it was. I met him at a book signing once. That was like, you pass by, he signs it, he doesn't even look up at you, you don't have no idea who you are. That was cool. Something I did on my own, but this one was more personal. I had a friend who saw my website, nolifetometal.com, and I had this huge Nugent section, of course, and he loved it. And he contacted me just because of the website, and he's like, "Hey, I love your Nugent website. He's like, my collection is massive. He says, I even have Ted Nugent costumes from back in the Amboy Dukes days. And uh, he says, one of these days I want to, you help me make a website like that. And I'm like, all right, cool. So I kept up with him over several months. And then come to find out, he called me one day and he's like, he's just really depressed and sad. And he's like, I'm like,
Mhm.
what's the matter, man? He's like, my sister just had a stroke and,
Oh,
she's not going to make it. And I was like, I'm sorry, man. I said, well, I said, let me pray for you. And I said, but he said, okay, cool. I appreciate that. I said, no. I said, if I'm going to pray for you, I'm going to call and check up on you and make sure everything's going right. Cause I wanted to make sure everything's okay with you. So yeah,
yeah.
okay, cool, man. So every 2 weeks or so, 2 to 3 weeks, I'd call and I wouldn't get him. He was a very well-off man with a big job, and he wouldn't answer sometimes. But I called him every 2 to 3 weeks. Hey, man, this is Scott. Just calling to see how you're doing, how your sister's doing, blah blah blah.
Hmm.
Well, a year goes by, and I did that for the entire year. And he tells me at the end of the year that his sister is doing better. She's
Hmm.
got back most of her cognitive skills, and she's even able to drive again,
Oh,
which was
great.
amazing. So he's like, "Hey man, I want to give you something." He goes, "Be for caring and for calling me." And I'm like, "Dude, you don't have to give me anything. I was just being a friend."
Yeah.
No, you don't understand. I have to give you this. So anyhow, he ends up giving me backstage passes and concert tickets, front row concert tickets to meet Ted Nugent. And so that's where I got this album signed. So I got to actually, be backstage with Nugent and talk to him and get to know him a little bit. And so it was a really cool gift from somebody for something I was not expecting or even wanting. It wasn't the point.
Yeah. That's great. That's
So yeah,
fantastic.
yeah, it was interesting. And then it went on because then a year later, I still kept in touch with him. And I still kept calling him and asking him how he was doing, how his sister was doing. And he ended up flying me out to meet him at his home. And we got to spend the entire day with Nugent at one of his shows. We watched the show from the side of the stage. We were allowed to go in the security pit and watch the show. And so it was yeah, fantastic. And it
Wow.
was at that point he revealed to me, dude, I need to tell you something. He's like, this is why I brought you out here. He said, I've been suicidal for over 2 years now. And he said, there was a few times when I was sitting in my office and I just couldn't take it anymore. And I'm sitting there with a gun in my hand, and
Oh,
he
shit.
goes, and for some reason I'd go over hit that machine. He goes, and there you would be. Hey man, it's just Scott. I'm just calling to check and see how you're doing. Blah blah blah. Give me a call back. He goes, and every time that happened, he goes, it just made me smile, and I didn't go through with it. So I thought that was,
That's
I
great.
mean, that's incredible. So anyhow, long story for an album showing an album, but
But that's great. That's what the kind of stuff I love to hear, Scott,
yeah.
honestly.
So I got a couple others, and the stories connected with them are not that far off. But here,
Hmm.
this is actually a CD. I've got the vinyl too, but this is actually Dark Angels Leave Scars,
Hmm.
and I've got a copy. This copy is actually signed by Ron Reinhardt,
Nice.
vocalist, and Ron is now and has been for the last decade. I can call him my brother. He
Hmm.
calls me all the time. I call him all the time, but Ultimatum was doing a show out in California, and we were opening up for a band called Oil, and Oil was Ron's band in the '90s. And so when I was there, I'm like, I'm taking my Dark Angel CD, and I'm gonna have him sign it, right? And in the '90s, especially the late '90s, metal was a dirty word. Nobody really knew.
Yeah.
Dark Angel wasn't even thought about. So went to the show, and we were setting up, and I said, "Hey, Ron," I'm introducing myself. I said, "Hey, do you mind?" I walked out to my car. I got something I want to show you. He was like, "Yeah, come on, let's go." So we walked out to the parking lot behind the place we were playing, and I pulled out my Dark Angel CD and handed it to him. He just starts laughing. He goes, "Man, I didn't think anybody cared about Dark Angel anymore." And I was like, "Oh man, I'm a huge fan." And he signed my CD and ended up becoming friends with him from that day on. And a similar story, he ended up getting hurt. He was moving a refrigerator, and the refrigerator fell on top of him
Oh
and
no.
destroyed his back, put him in the hospital. And so it actually, Dark Angel was doing a reunion and it ended up destroying the reunion because he couldn't do anything. He was, in traction basically. Same
Mm.
kind of deal though. I kept calling him every few weeks, just checking on him. And because of that, he just became like a brother. He just appreciated the fact that somebody cared enough to call and check on him. So anyhow, that's why that one is kind of special to me. It was the very first thing I got signed by him, and still own it to this day, and he's still a friend to this day. All right. So sorry about the technical glitch there. We don't know what happened, but I don't know where I left off at, but I'll just show a couple more kind of cool
Okay.
records in the collection. But this is the very first Anthrax Soldiers of Metal single that they put out before their first album came out. These guys were kind of like local heroes to me growing up because I grew up in New Jersey. They were from New York. New Jersey, New York, Philadelphia area, Pennsylvania area was just all kind of, one big mosh pit. we were we were all into all these bands. So these were just a local band and they obviously became huge. So this is actually one of those ones I talked about getting rid of in 1990 when I sold my whole collection. So getting it back was quite difficult because this thing sells for at least $200, if not more. But a friend of mine who was a very good friend of mine, he's like, dude, I found a copy for you. And he just sent it to me as a gift. So
Oh, nice.
yeah, those are kind of things you like. Not only is it something cool from my past, but it's something you treasure because a friend gave it to you,
Yes.
Same thing with this one. So this is Anvil, the very first Anvil album under the name Lips before they changed their name, when they put this album out by themselves before they got picked up by Attic Records, kind of the proto thrash, proto speed metal band from Canada. And again, this is just a friend of mine. He goes, I remain friends with to this day, and he's like, dude, I found this for you. I'm gonna send you just a surprise in the mail when I get it, and it's this. And I'm like, wow, man. I said that thing had to cost you like $500 because that's how much it sells for. He goes, doesn't matter how much it costs, it's yours now. It's like, okay, thanks.
Wow.
So yeah.
I've never seen that cover, and I mean, I live in Toronto area, right? And I played with Anvil numerous times. I know Rob and Lips and those guys, and I've never ever seen that. I don't even think he's ever had it on their person. Like whenever they were selling stuff, he's never even showed it to me. He's never mentioned it, even that.
Yeah, it was definitely a difficult find.
Yeah.
I was shocked that he was able to find a copy for me. So I don't even know how many were pressed. Like I said, it was on Splash Records, which wasn't even a record company. It was just something they made up.
Yeah.
So and then I also, like I said, this is the Aerosmith record I showed earlier. But
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, one of my all-time favorite records. But like I told you, I was in 1990. I kind of got involved heavily into a cultish like church where they convinced me that all my music was evil and I should get rid of it all. And I don't know. I probably kept that, commitment to listening to only Christian music for, I don't know, maybe a year or two. And one day I was out on the road doing something for work, and I flipped on the radio, and it was on Z-Rock, which was a U.S. metal station back in the 80s and 90s. And they were playing an album side, and they played the B-side of this album here. Man, I was just gigging it, driving down the road, just air guitaring on my steering wheel, the whole thing, looking like an idiot, probably everybody else. But it was at that point I'm like, why am I not listening to this music that I enjoy anymore? So again, at that point, I just started rebuilding the collection back again, and yeah, that was kind of a center point in my collecting hobby. This album was. So I think I have like 10 different copies of that silly record.
Interesting. So the question that I'm sure that people are probably thinking to themselves as they're watching this is, does Scott have any tips on finding some of these hard to get records? What is your secret for finding records?
I go to a lot of record shows. I find cool stuff there. I visit the local record stores every time I go on vacation. I'm making time to go to record stores and or antique malls and dig through stuff. So there's that, but of course there's also Discogs if you don't mind paying up for stuff in eBay. And I do buy a lot of stuff from eBay. I'm not one of those guys who bids and overpays for stuff. I'll bid the minimum. And there's been a lot of times where I bid something on something really rare. Matter of fact, I got one right here that I'll show it to you because I haven't even showed this on a video yet. There's this is Alice Cooper's. This is Muscle of Love, and it's a jukebox EP, 4 songs. It's got the little jukebox slips in the back. So this thing sells for about $80, and I'm not paying $80 for a single. So I bought the record without the cover for $5 on eBay. Nobody else bid on it. It was great shape. So I just kept my eye open trying to find someone selling the cover, and I found someone selling the cover, got overbid, and this is years ago. And then just maybe 2 months ago, I finally found. I'm talking for 2 years now. I've been looking on eBay constantly for this stupid cover, and somebody was selling cover only, no record. I'm like, right on. And of course, who wants a cover without a record, right? So I bid on it. I bid the minimum and won. So I ended up getting this $80 record for under $10. And then when I got it, it even had the uncut slips inside of it. So it was awesome. So that's just one of the things I've done. Just be patient and bid the minimum. And sometimes people don't bid on stuff.
That's fantastic. I mean, that's a great story and a great tip too. Patience, because some people, and I'm guilty of this sometimes too. I see something come out, like let's say a box set. Like I'm a big Kiss fan, okay? And when they released that Kiss Destroyer box set, I was right away going to go jump on it and pay $300. And then I realized if I would have waited a few weeks later on Amazon, they had it for half price. You know what I mean? So sometimes it pays to be patient sometimes, because you won't end up paying nearly as much money for some of this stuff if you just, pull back and just calm down. It's not going to disappear maybe totally. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
and it's hard to do. I'm sure you can say for yourself too that there's probably been times where you just pulled the trigger maybe a little too quickly on something,
Yep. But then as a collector, you also know times where you didn't jump on it right away, and then it's like there's a few years ago on Record Store Day, I mean, 2 years ago, they did the UFO live at Youngstown LP. I missed it. I couldn't find it. Didn't get it. And now that thing sells for $200, and I'm not paying $200 for it. So again, I'll be patient and wait. But if I would have just bought it when it, the day it came out for $50 or whatever they were selling it for, then. But I tried. It just wasn't there. But so it worked both ways. But again, I'm not paying $200 for it. I'll be patient.
Yeah.
So
I'm curious about. We're gonna go. There's two more topics I wanted to talk to you guys to talk to you about. That's very much interest to me. Within the vinyl community here, it seems like there's two types of groups. There's like this one set of group of people that I noticed. Like I'm not sure if you know these guys, like Norman Maslow, and these guys. Michael 45 RPM, these guys that do they're very audiophilish, very jazz oriented record collecting and stuff like that. And they're all about the greatest quality sounding albums and pressings that you can get ever. And then there's another group of people, like, for example, I find like you and like Lazarus and these guys who tend to be more about the music itself and not so much about if it's the greatest sounding pressing of that particular album. You know what I mean? You guys seem much more interested about the music itself. Now, the reason why I'm asking this is because there was this big kerfuffle that happened a few months back about MoFi. I don't know if you've heard about this, where they were saying that their so-called analog pressings were actually digital pressings. Did you as a collector find this a big disaster for you, or did you just not really care one way or another?
I was of the don't care one way or the other when it comes to the MoFi things. I think anybody who was really thinking that MoFi was putting out all non-digital stuff was fooling themselves, because the entire record industry now is including vinyl is all built on digital. I mean, I don't know if you know what I do for a living, but I'm a graphic designer, and I work for 4 different record companies doing layouts and design. And many times I'm uploading, music for vinyl to these different record plants around the world, and all of them are the same thing. They want a DDP file, which means you're taking that analog music and you're creating and putting it into a digital file before it's burned onto a record.
Yeah.
So to me, it was just like, big shock.
Yeah, because I mean that's the big thing that I found sort of interesting, because these people were I'm not trying to point them out and make them look bad. I'm just saying that there was a lot of people that think this way, where if it's not all analog cut from the original tapes, then it sounds almost not like it's worth to go and pursue. You know what I mean? Which I think is sort of silly, if you ask me, because I know lots of records that I have that are fully digital and sound fantastic. Sure, there's a lot of great analog records, and I have them too. I've collected a few all analog stuff, but you know what? You've hit the nail right on the head. I know, for example, that you work as a graphic designer. I was going to ask you about this next, actually. And I know for a fact, because I do my own very small little record label where I do my own pressings and stuff. And it's the same thing. I mean, I work digitally as well. I mean, sure, I'd love to have a 2-track analog machine that I could master to and stuff like that. But first of all, it's very difficult to find this stuff for affordable prices. Number 2, it's a bitch to maintain. And number 3, not many studios around the world or places have the capacity to work with that stuff.
Right.
So I just think it's crazy to kind of limit yourself to just that. I mean, I want to get my music out to as many people as I can and have decent sounding pressings. And nobody has ever told me that my records don't sound good. So why would I,
No, they sound amazing. I mean, I play them on my turntable and they sound great. I mean, I've got my Bose speakers that I've had since the '80s, and and I got a
yeah.
more modern turntable. I still have my '80s turntable, but I have a more modern, and it sounds fantastic. Do I have a $6,000 turntable? No, I have a $500 turntable, but it still sounds good to me. So
Yeah,
uh,
exactly.
the other thing about that whole thing is digital has come so far, and you can do so much master with this with sound quality now. I have a buddy who does mastering for a living, and there was one band in particular I remember called Eternal Right. They were a glam band out of L.A. during the '80s. The guitar player was one of those guys that Ozzy Osbourne was thinking about picking up when he first started Blizzard of Oz. So that's nobody really knows who they are, but anyhow, he was a total shredder. Well, they put out one album and called World Requiem on a really unknown label, and it was really poorly recorded. And one of the labels I worked for was doing a reissue, and I'm like, man, that thing sounds so bad. Why are you putting that out? He goes, well, let's see what the engineer can do. We sent the music over to the engineer. We had the original tapes. We sent the music over. It was like night and day. It was like, how is this the same recording? I couldn't believe the miracles he could do with the digital stuff these days. I mean, there was things you could hear in there that was gone on the original recordings that he was able to bring back. And it's the same thing with what I do for a living. And you can ask me a question after that. But I mean, I've been doing stuff recently for Capitol Records and Universal Records, and a lot of the original artwork is gone. And I have to recreate the covers. And I can actually make some of these covers look better than the originals with what I can do in digital now.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great segue to what I was going to ask you about next, because I know that you're a graphic artist guy, and I know that you have like a separate segment on your channel where you show the work that you do on your channel, which I find absolutely fantastic, because I love those kind of things. And me myself, I know, having to work with artists as well to do some of my album covers and stuff, I'm always interested in these sorts of things. Right now, you answered one of my questions, which was, do you work with any major labels besides independent labels? And you just said you work for Capitol now, right?
Well, I'm not working directly for any of the big labels. I work for a lot of small labels. There's 4 labels in particular that I do a lot of work for. They just give me everything they do. And those labels have now moved into working with Capitol and Universal and Metal Blade and Century Media and Seasons of Mist, those labels.
Yeah.
So I end up doing work for them, and then because of that, now I'm working with those labels. So I'm not necessarily hired by Capitol. I'm hired by this other label, but I'm having to work directly with Capitol to get everything approved.
Okay, great. So first question, do you have a favorite album cover that you worked on?
I've worked on a lot. Yeah, I could probably pull some out that I've done recently. I got them right here.
Great.
I've got some right here. So this is a recent one that I just recently came out by a band called Fear Not. I thought it was kind of a cool concept. The band came up with the concept. They're kind of a hard rock with a southern rock twinge. They're not metal by stretch of the imagination, but they are fairly rockin' band, fairly heavy rockin' band. But they wanted this. The album's called Fields of Sorrow, excuse me, and they wanted this dilapidated old field with this beat up old shed, and so that's kind of what I came up with. So this is totally generated. This is not a real photograph, obviously. But this little itty bitty, if you look down the corner around here, you see that little itty bitty.
Yeah.
So it's like there's a gravestone here and some fresh dirt, and you can see out of death there's something coming to life, and that's kind of the whole concept of the Fields of Sorrow album. So yeah, I mean, I really like the way this one came out. But I don't always get to do the album cover. Sometimes another artist will do the album cover, and then I'll do the rest of the layout from that. And like this is one here, thrash band Vindicator out of Ohio, I believe. They had some other artists did the cover art, and then I take the cover art and I create everything else. So that back cover, I took pieces of the cover art and put it together and put the little fingers over top of their logo and that kind of stuff. So yeah, I love doing this kind of stuff. I'm trying to find another cover that I've actually worked on. I've got hundreds of records under here. test pressings and everything from country to rock to Christian contemporary.
Mm-hmm.
My gosh, there's so many album covers. I don't know. I can't find another one that I worked. I've worked on all these, but I can't find another one that I actually did the cover on recently. But anyhow,
Well,
yeah,
that's fine. I could just ask you another question, though, in regards to this, though. Now, since you said you also worked on album covers where you said, for example, that they didn't have the original artwork anymore, right?
correct.
Now, what is the big what's like the big thing for you in terms of doing that? Are you really trying to get it exactly the same, or is there some leeway that you can maybe make it, maybe a little lighter, a little darker? How do the people usually approach these sort of reworkings?
It depends on the band and the label. Many times they'll want it as close as I can get it to the original, and they'll give me the leeway. If you can improve it, a little bit, bring, the shadow area. You can't see this guy. Matter of fact, I just saw one in here. I'll show it to you. That explains what I'm talking about.
Okay.
This is a band called DeGarmo and Key. And where is it here? DeGarmo and Key. Here it is. There it is. This is an album from the, 77, I think, or so, that I worked on for Capitol Music. You can see the Capitol logo on the back.
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't have the original logo, so all they had was a beat up old copy. So I rescanned it. I recreated the logo from scratch, so it's fresh, it's clean, it doesn't look, bitmappy or pixelated or any of those kind
Yeah.
So really, the only thing I ended up using from the scan is this photograph. But even in the photograph, I was able to bring out some detail in this. There's a train coming down the tracks. What it is,
Mm-hmm.
I was able to bring out some detail in this that wasn't in the original. I mean, it's not a huge difference, but they loved it. The fact that you could even see that there was like smoke coming off of the train and that kind of thing. They couldn't see that in the original. So
Yeah.
so that, and sometimes I give them that leeway, but other times they let me do they'll let me change up the entire thing. Here's another one. This is Pound Hound, which is Doug Pinnick from King's X.
Oh, yeah.
And this had never been on vinyl before, so I was able to have a little bit of leeway on messing with it, and making it work for vinyl. And there's more of the picture here than there was on the CD. There's the logo's bigger, that kind of thing. So yeah, it depends. Other times the label will say, "I hate the original cover. Can you come up with something completely different?" And so I get that kind of leeway too, which is kind of nice. I just did that for a band from the early '80s called Stricken. They had an album out called Blitzkrieg, and it was a very cheesy, just square picture of a lightning bolt coming down. And they were like, "Can you do something different with it?" So I ended up creating this whole background with the lightning bolt coming down, and I had the lightning bolt coming down from the band's logo and then hitting the word Blitzkrieg and lighting up the Blitzkrieg. So that was kind of the leeway I was given from that label. It just depends on the band and the label, but either way, even if I'm just doing it exact, I enjoy doing it.
Yeah.
It's funny. I see people doing VC videos and they'll show, "Look, I got this album. I don't know what album it is. Toys in the Attic. Look at this Toys in the Attic record. And here's another version of it. Look, it's slightly different colors." And I'm like, that could have been from the exact same printing, and you can get a slightly different color depending on the pressman.
Yeah, because that's one thing that I think people are not too aware of, because I've seen that happen a lot too, where somebody will say, "I got this reissue of this album and I have the original. Look at how much darker this one is, or how much orange one this one is." But sometimes find people are a little too nitpicky on that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
every press is different. Every pressman is different. Presses have developed over the years. I mean, back in the day, the Heidelberg presses, it was a mixture of inks and water and all those kind of things going through the presses. And depending on how much pressure you're putting down you got a cyan, magenta, yellow, black. You got all these different cylinders that it's running through. If they're putting more pressure on the black on this one, then it's going to be a little darker than maybe when it came out 400 copies later, because the pressure released a little bit. So
I got to ask you something then. This is perfect. You being a big Kiss guy and being a graphics guy, this is like meant to be this question. Okay. You must be aware of the Rock and Roll Over Blue Tier Paul Stanley pressing. Now, the big thing with that, within the Kiss collecting circle, is that everybody said that was a printing glitch that happened to have that blue tier. Do you think that was a printing glitch, or do you think that was purposely done? Because some people say when they look at it, they go, "That looks too perfect of a tier to be a printing glitch." What do you think?
Well, there's something in printing we call it's this is here. It's called a loop, and you can look in and you can see the actual printing dots and anything that's printed is made up of little dots. So if you're printing 4-color process, it's a cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, and it's those 4 dots combined to make this big picture. Well, if you take the Kiss album and you look at it under a loop, you can see that it's a mush of ink. It's a cyan ink, and it was probably something going on with the press. It is definitely a printing error.
Oh, great. So there we go.
But it is a perfect printing error, because I mean, it does look like a tear coming off of Paul Stanley's eye. So it is a cool collectible, regardless of the fact that it was an error.
There you go. So Kiss fans, we have Scott Waters to thank now to clear up this mystery that people have been talking about for so long, about whether or not it was an actual printing thing or an actual design thing. I mean, I wasn't sure what to think, because to me, when you look at it, it's like, wow, that's such a perfect looking tear. If that was a printing error, it's such a coincidence that it turned out so perfectly,
Yeah, we always call them printing hickeys, or that's what they were. If you look at any album, especially from the 60s or 70s and even into the 80s, when the presses weren't quite up to the quality they are now, you can see sometimes little dots. Sometimes there'll be like a little circle that's just the wrong color, or like ink missing. All that stuff is just a printing error from the water and the ink hitting the metal plate, and when it comes off, it just leaves a little spot.
Yeah.
And if the pressman doesn't notice it, and you don't go clean the plate and the roller, it'll just roll the whole job like that after a while.
Yeah, great. So I have one last question for you, and it's a big one. So put your thinking cap on for this one. And the last question for you, Scott, and again, thank you for doing this. I think this is vastly needed to have people of your influence and of your sort of knowledge of music in general to be spoken to more often. So thank you again for doing this. And the last question I'm going to ask you is this: in 5 years from now, do you think that the vinyl resurgence will be at the place it is now, or do you think it'll start drifting off, or what do you think is going to happen with vinyl 5 years from now?
I honestly think that vinyl sales are going to start drifting off. I think the prices have gotten out of control, unfortunately, and even the labels that I work for, it's not necessarily just the labels jacking up the prices. It's the cost of vinyl. It's the cost of manufacturing. When it's costing them $15 a piece to print, 200 records, they can't sell it for $15, because not only do you have the cost of production and the cost of printing the album and the cost of printing the insert and printing the cover, you also got to pay for the all the licensing and all the residuals, and then you got to pay your artist to do all the artwork, and you got to pay your studio to do the mastering. All that stuff adds up. So you got $20 into a record, you're going to sell it for $30 or $35.99 or $40, whatever it is. And then you get into the record store day, and they're getting part of the profits on top of it. The prices are going to jack up even more. So I honestly think it's going to, unless the prices can start going back down again, I think it's going to dip. I do see a resurgence in sales in CDs, though.
Yes. I was just going to ask you that.
Yeah, I just, from working with these different labels and cassettes too, which is weird. I don't know. I mean, they're okay, but man, they just don't have the best sound. But in any case, CD sales have picked back up again quite a bit, and digital sales have dropped off the charts. I mean, people just aren't buying MP3s anymore. They're streaming, so they're doing everything's free now. I'd be surprised if MP3 sales even last through the next 5 years. Have you heard rumors of like iTunes going away?
Oh, doggy. Yeah, I mean, I've heard about this as well too. That it's become such a unappealing format now that they're thinking about doing something different and just ditching it altogether. I've heard that too.
Yeah, what I had heard that was iTunes was going to just become another streaming platform.
Yeah.
But they already have Apple Music, so I'm not sure why they would need. I don't know. Anyhow, who knows? But yeah, I do see a resurgence in CDs. CD prices, unfortunately, are going up too, again, because of the cost of the raw materials. It's just, but it is what it is.
But I'll tell you, Scott. I mean, I do CDs as well as vinyl, and the one thing that's appealing to me from the aspect of an artist and an independent label is that I only have to wait sometimes just 3 weeks maximum from the time I give them my stuff to getting a finished product. Whereas now I'm still waiting on my Project Gemini Indie Year 3073 Book 3 vinyl after I put it in 9 months ago to get pressed.
Yes.
Okay. So it's more appealing to do CDs a lot of way, and people are going to CD because they don't have to wait. They order their stuff, and all of a sudden 3 weeks later they have a CD in their mail.
Yes, and that's the way that the vinyl industry is right now. Some plants are a year wait to get something,
Mm-hmm.
which is ridiculous when you have to pay them up front for half, and you're paying, I don't know, $5,000, and you're having to give them the $2,500 to sit around for a year. It's ridiculous. I mean,
Yeah.
And I see that too. Now it's a little different though with small labels and independent people like yourself doing your own stuff. You don't get the push that the labels are getting, because I've seen other record labels getting stuff pushed around in 3 to 4 months, which is much more appealing to me.
Yeah.
9 to 12 months, but still, even 3 to 4 months, you can get a CD in 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, the only hope that I'm thinking that might happen is because now you hear that, there's companies, like there's a company here in Canada that's making pressing machines for vinyl presses, like the new machines finally, for like the first one since the 80s, right, to be made. So, and then there's rumor now that GZ Vinyl is expanding and opening another pressing plant in America and stuff like that. So hopefully if these things start happening or are happening, maybe the wait times may start lowering themselves a bit if there's more pressing plants available, right,
Yep.
to do stuff.
Yep.
So hopefully that's something to keep your fingers crossed about, because and the other thing I'm hoping that gets happening is nobody is around to make new lates, like cutting lates that make the lacquers.
Yeah, there's only one company that does it, I think.
There's only one company that makes the actual those actual lacquers themselves. But I'm talking about even the machines themselves that you make them with. Like I don't think there's been a new Neumann lathe made in God knows how long. Again, probably since the 70s, 80s. So they need somebody to make a company who knows how to do that and make more of those, because the more of those around, the quicker the whole process will happen as well with that, because there's only limited places you can go to not only get your stuff cut, but now there's only one place you can get the lathe, the actual lathe from, like the actual materials from. And it's just unbelievable that there isn't somebody out there who's willing to drop a bit of money and do this, because he would have business coming out of his rear end if they had a company that was going to provide those things,
Yep. But yeah, there's also there's a company in Austria too that's now cutting records one at a time for people. So if you just want a really short run of 10 or 20 copies, they can do that, and it's much quicker. But
yeah,
it's going to cost you,
Yeah,
So
of course.
the other thing about it was the pandemic, the whole COVID thing really did a number on the record industry. Because I know, like, what's the big company out in the Czech Republic? Is they're one of the biggest pressing plants in the
GZ.
world. Yeah, so they laid so many people off because of closed down, and by the time it opened, a lot of their customers didn't come back. I didn't see a lot of their employees didn't come back, so they're very short-handed, and apparently they're having a hard time finding people to fill those positions. So, and so on top of having shortages in the raw materials, you also have a shortage in workers too. So that's why the turnaround time is so long right now. I'm really hoping it'll improve if it can improve and the prices can drop, I think the record sales will keep going. My kids are in their early 30s and late 20s, and they buy records. I mean, they don't listen to the same kind of music I listen to, but it doesn't matter. They still buy vinyl.
Yeah, exactly. So the audience is still there, right?
Yep.
So
I mean, they do a lot of streaming too, but when they're at home, they have turntables and they play their music. And Christmas time, my daughter's 28 years old, and Christmas time she's spinning Christmas records.
Yeah. So, same here. So great. So Scott, thank you again for doing this with me. I really appreciated your time to do this with me, and we definitely have to do this again. I'm sure we have a lot more that we can talk about, maybe something a little bit more specific next time, and I'd really like to speak to you more about music in general. So if you'd come back again, I'd really appreciate that.
Absolutely.
And so let's leave it at that. And thank you again for watching, everybody. If you have any comments, please leave them in the comments section. And if you have anything directly for Scott, I can even pass it over to Scott, and he can maybe answer you if you have any questions for him. And again, Scott, thank you very much for having me, or having you come on the channel and speak about the various things that we spoke about.
No problem. So when does the new Project Gemini come out?
The new Project Gemini album is supposed to come out in December. So I'm supposed to get the vinyl before Christmas. That is when I was told I was supposed to get it. So if I get it, I will let you know, because I know that you probably have everything up to that pretty much, I'm pretty sure. So
I have them all in
and
CD and vinyl now.
yeah, there you go. So yeah, so that's the forecast for that stuff. So yeah, and then we'll see what happens in the new year. So
Awesome. Appreciate it.
all right. So thanks, Scott, for sticking around and chatting with me, and we will talk again soon.
You got it. Thanks.